A poor young mother, a crying baby on a crowded flight, and a billionaire CEO whose life was about to change forever. When Lena Morales, a struggling single mom with nothing but a diaper bag and a heart full of fear, boarded a flight to Seattle, she never imagined her life would take a turn mid-air. With her infant daughter, Mila, screaming and judgmental stares piling up, Lena was seconds from breaking until a stranger in a suit offered not sympathy, but something far more rare, his shoulder. That man, Damian Blackwood, CEO, billionaire, and the last person you'd expect to cradle a crying baby like it was the most natural thing in the world. But why would someone like him care about someone like her? What secret pain was he hiding behind that calm smile? And when Lena wakes up to find out who he really is, will she trust him or run? This isn't just a story about class or coincidence. It's a journey through shame, strength, and the unexpected ways love finds us when we stop pretending we don't need it. If you're ready for a story that will pull your heartstrings and challenge your assumptions, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Now, let's begin. The crying pierced through the cabin like a siren, sharp, inescapable. A few passengers groaned audibly, others huffed and shifted in their seats. One man threw his blanket over his face, mumbling something under his breath. 17 rows from the front, in a cramped middle seat between two strangers, Lena Morales held her 6-month-old daughter, Mila, tightly against her chest. "Please, baby, please," Lena whispered, her voice cracking from exhaustion. She bounced gently, rubbed Mila's tiny back, shifted her weight left and right. But nothing worked. The baby's wails only grew louder. Her tiny fists clenched, her face beat red from crying. The flight attendant, an older woman with a stiff bun and even stiffer smile, approached with forced politeness. "Ma'am," she said, leaning down with a rehearsed frown, "you'll need to keep her calm. Other passengers are trying to sleep." Lena blinked up at her, dark circles hollowing her eyes. I'm trying. She hasn't slept since yesterday. The noise, the air pressure, she's overwhelmed." The woman didn't respond. She just turned and walked back down the aisle, heels clicking. Lena swallowed hard. She knew what everyone was thinking. Another irresponsible single mom who can't control her baby. She could feel it in their stares, the silent judgment, the shifting shoulders, the turned heads. She looked down at Mila, rocking her slowly. Her baby's cheeks were soaked in tears, tiny lips trembling. Lena fought back her own. She hadn't slept in almost 2 days. After working a double shift at Mel's Diner in Phoenix, she'd rushed home, packed what little she could fit into a backpack, and begged her neighbor to drive her to the airport. She couldn't afford the ticket, had put it on a credit card that was already maxed out. But this flight, this weekend, it wasn't optional. Her sister Noelle was getting married. And, despite not speaking in nearly 2 years, Lena had promised herself she would show up, even if she had to drag herself there with bleeding feet, even if she didn't belong. Someone behind her sighed dramatically. "Maybe babies shouldn't be flying at night," a man muttered. Someone else clicked their tongue. Lena wanted to disappear into the seat, to sink into the floor, but she couldn't, because Mila was counting on her. Always had been. From the moment her father walked away, the second she whispered, "I'm pregnant," that had been the start of it all. The late nights, the missed meals, the evictions, the overdraft fees, the humiliation of WIC cards that didn't scan properly at checkout, and the silence. The terrible, suffocating silence from the people she once called family. She kissed the crown of Mila's head. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I know you're scared. Mommy's scared, too." Suddenly, Mila's cry pitched higher, a shrill, painful shriek, and a dozen heads turned in unison. Lena's cheeks burned. Her chest tightened. She turned toward the window, cradling Mila protectively, tears brimming in her eyes. She was going to lose it, right here, right now. This was her breaking point. And then a voice beside her. "Excuse me," it said gently. "Would it be all right if I tried something?" She turned slowly, expecting another angry complaint. Instead, she met the calm, steady gaze of a man in a charcoal-gray sweater and dark jeans. His hands rested gently in his lap. His eyes, deep brown, soft with concern, didn't carry an ounce of judgment. Lena blinked. I'm sorry, I know this might be odd," the man said, "but I've had some practice calming babies. My cousin has twins. May I?" He gestured gently toward Mila, not moving closer, just offering. Lena stared at him, uncertain. Strangers didn't offer to help like this. Not men, and certainly not men who looked like they belonged in first class, not squished in row 17B next to a sweaty, panicked mom. Still, Mila was now hiccuping between cries, her whole body shaking. And Lena. She was done pretending she could hold it all together. She hesitated, then slowly nodded. "Okay," she whispered, voice shaking. "Just be careful." The man extended his arms carefully, and Lena passed Mila over like she was handing away her whole world. The moment Mila touched his chest, she stilled. He held her gently, one broad hand supporting her back, the other cradling her head. He began to hum a soft, low melody, rhythmic and warm, like a lullaby whispered through velvet. And to everyone's surprise, including Lena's, Mila went quiet. Completely quiet. Not a cry, not a whimper, just a tiny exhale, then a sigh. Then she closed her eyes. The cabin fell silent. Lena stared in disbelief. Passengers looked on, some smiling, others visibly relieved. The man glanced down at Mila, then back at Lena. "She's a beautiful baby," he said, smiling. Lena covered her mouth, overwhelmed. How did you do that?" He shrugged lightly. "Still rocking the baby? Sometimes. All it takes is a new voice, a calm heart." Lena's tears finally spilled. But this time, they weren't from shame. They were from the strange, breathtaking feeling that for the first time in a long time, someone saw her. The hum of the airplane filled the silence now that Mila had stopped crying. It was almost surreal. Lena stared at her daughter, who was now curled like a tiny kitten against the chest of a man she didn't know. Her fists unclenched, her lashes resting gently against her cheeks, her breathing steady, peaceful. Lena blinked again, just to make sure it wasn't a dream. The man sat beside her in 17C, angled slightly toward her seat. He hadn't said much since Mila quieted. He just rocked her gently, his broad palm covering most of her small back, his thumb drawing absent-minded circles. Everything about him was composed. His voice, when he finally spoke again, was low and warm. "I'm sorry if I crossed a line," he said, still watching the baby. "I know that kind of help isn't always easy to accept." Lena pulled her hoodie sleeves down nervously. "No, you didn't. You saved me," she said, her voice almost breaking. "I was about 2 minutes from losing it completely." He looked over, meeting her eyes. There was no smugness in his face, just a quiet, respectful curiosity, like he wasn't trying to impress her, like he really saw her. "I'm Damien, by the way," he offered. Lena hesitated for a beat. Then, "Lena, Lena," he repeated gently, like he was trying it on. They sat in silence for a moment, the cabin dim and sleepy around them. Most passengers had returned to their podcasts or neck pillows. Lena glanced at Mila again. "I don't know what you did, but she hasn't rested like that in days," she said quietly. "She was just tired." "Same as you, probably," Damien replied. Lena half laughed, half exhaled. "I haven't slept more than 2 hours straight since she was born." Damien nodded like he understood. "Can I ask how old she is?" "6 months," Lena said. "Almost to the day." "She's beautiful," he said, "and strong." That cry could shatter glass. Lena smirked, then let her face relax. "Yeah, she's loud, but she's mine." There was pride in her voice, even through the exhaustion. Damien adjusted slightly in his seat, still holding Mila like it was the most natural thing in the world. Not a wrinkle of his gray sweater or the crisp collar of his button-up shirt seemed to bother him. Mila's tiny hand was balled into the fabric of his chest, and he didn't seem to care one bit. Lena noticed his hands clean, manicured nails, his watch a sleek black leather strap with a silver face. Nothing flashy, but expensive. He looked like someone who belonged in a polished office on the 40th floor, not next to her on a budget red-eye. "So?" Lena asked slowly, curiosity breaking through her hesitation. "You said you've had practice with babies," he chuckled softly. "My cousin's twins. I used to babysit whenever I was in town. They screamed like banshees for the first year. Eventually, I figured out a few tricks. This hum thing." He gave a faint smile. "It worked once, so I just kept using it." "Well," she said, watching her daughter melt into his shoulder, "it's working again." Lena pulled her knees up slightly. Her body was starting to crash now that the adrenaline had faded. Her arms ached from holding Mila for hours. Her chest was sore from the crying, the anxiety, the judgmental stares that had come at her like darts from all sides. She glanced sideways at Damien. "So, do you do this often?" she asked. "Rescue random moms on planes?" He laughed. "No, first time." Lena raised an eyebrow. "Seriously, seriously," he said with a small nod. "Usually, I'm in a different seat, further up." She caught the phrasing "further up," and it clicked. He wasn't supposed to be back here in economy. She narrowed her eyes slightly. "So why are you here?" Damien leaned back a little, one hand still softly patting Mila's back. "I guess I got tired of predictability. First class is all champagne and silence. Sometimes I like being reminded what real life looks like." Lena snorted. "Well, this is it," she said, gesturing to the mess of her hoodie, stained baby blanket, and crushed snack wrappers in the seat pocket. "Welcome to real life." Damien looked at her again carefully, not unkindly. "And it suits you," he said. Lena didn't know what to say to that. No man had complimented her in a way that didn't feel loaded in years. She looked away, suddenly shy. Damien continued, more gently this time. "I don't mean it to sound weird. I just think there's something powerful about a woman who handles everything alone and still holds her baby like that. With love. Even when she's falling apart." Lena's throat tightened. She looked at him again. There was no flirtation in his face. No pity, either. Just quiet admiration. She nodded once, then leaned her head back against the seat. She didn't mean to doze, but the rocking of the plane, the warmth of the cabin, the soft hum of her daughter finally sleeping, and the first real kindness she'd felt in months were too much. Her eyelids dropped, her breathing slowed, and just before she fell asleep, she whispered, more to herself than him, "Thank you." And then everything went still. Her body leaned slightly toward Damien without realizing, and he let her. He shifted just enough to support her gently, his arms still steady, her daughter tucked close to his chest. From the outside, they looked like a family. To Lena, it felt like a dream. But by the time she woke up, everything she thought she knew about this stranger would change. Lena didn't remember falling asleep. One moment, she was sitting upright, trying not to cry. The next, she woke to the soft rhythm of breathing steady, soothing, and the warmth of someone's shoulder beneath her cheek. Her eyes fluttered open in the dim cabin light. It took a second to register what she was leaning against. Not a seat, not a pillow. Damien. Her head rested gently on his shoulder. Her body had curled instinctively toward him in sleep, and he hadn't moved an inch. He was still holding Mila, who was now snuggled between them like a bridge, her tiny mouth open slightly, hands relaxed. Lena sat up quickly, heart racing. "Oh, my God, I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I didn't mean to. I must have just—" Damien looked at her calmly, eyes soft with amusement. "It's all right," he said. "You needed the rest." Lena ran a hand through her tangled hair, cheeks flushed. "I didn't mean to fall asleep on you. That's so inappropriate." "It's not," Damien said simply. He gently transferred Mila back into Lena's arms, his hands moving with natural care. Mila stirred, but didn't wake. Lena cradled her again, and for the first time in weeks, her arms didn't feel so heavy. She looked at him, still unsure how to process what had just happened. "Thank you," she whispered again, this time fully awake, fully meaning it. Damien gave a small nod, then pulled a napkin from the seat pocket and dabbed at a wet spot on his shoulder. Mila's drool had soaked through his sweater. "Sorry about that," Lena said, embarrassed. "Trust me," Damien replied, chuckling. "It's not the worst thing I've had on a suit." She smiled, genuinely, for the first time since she boarded the plane. They sat in silence again for a few minutes. The plane had settled into that strange, suspended calm that only happens at 30,000 feet. Finally, Lena spoke. "You know, I didn't even want to come." Damien turned his head, attentive. "To the wedding, I mean," she clarified. "It's my sister. We haven't talked in 2 years." He said nothing, letting her decide how much she wanted to share. "I got pregnant, and she said I ruined my life. Said I was throwing everything away. We fought. We haven't spoken since." Lena adjusted Mila in her arms. "But she sent an invitation anyway. I think because our mom passed last year and she feels obligated." Her voice cracked on Mom. "I told myself I was going just to show I'm not broken, that I made something out of nothing. But really, I think I just didn't want Mila to grow up without knowing family." Damien's brow furrowed slightly. Not in judgment, but in that quiet way people look when they're absorbing something heavy. "You did make something out of nothing," he said after a moment. Lena laughed dryly. "I'm staying in a motel that smells like bleach and old regrets. I paid for this flight with a credit card I shouldn't even have. My car's dead, my rent's late. I'm literally one baby formula away from overdrafting again. That doesn't feel like something." He shifted slightly, resting his hands over his knees. "Then maybe that's what strength looks like," he said. "Not the job, not the money, But the fact that you keep showing up—" Lena turned to him, unsure how to respond. No one had ever said it like that before. Not the few friends who had drifted away once she became a mom. Not her former boss who cut her hours once she started bringing Mila to work. Not even herself, especially not herself. "You don't even know me," she whispered. Damien smiled gently. "I don't have to. You're sitting on a 5-hour flight with a baby in your lap and a fire in your spine. That tells me enough." Lena looked away, blinking hard. The words hit deep, and yet a question had been lingering in her chest ever since he first reached out to help. "So, what's your deal?" she asked, glancing sideways. "You said you're usually in a different seat. First class. Right. Why are you back here slumming it with the rest of us?" Damien gave a soft laugh. "You ever get tired of the same view, even when it's beautiful?" She frowned, not understanding. "I fly a lot for work," he continued. "And sometimes I sit up there and forget what's real. I start thinking the world is all polite wine lists and perfect linen napkins. But back here," he gestured toward the economy cabin, where people were shifting, coughing, snoring, and occasionally spilling snacks. "This is where life happens." Lena gave him a skeptical look. "That's the most poetic way I've ever heard someone describe an uncomfortable seat and bad coffee." Damien chuckled. "Guilty?" She tilted her head. "So what do you do?" "Really?" His face paused, just briefly. A flicker. "Then business consulting?" She raised a brow. "That's vague. It's a vague job. But you don't talk like a consultant," she said, watching him closely. "You talk like a professor, or a poet, or someone who doesn't need this seat." Damien smiled, but didn't answer. "Okay, mystery man," she said, pulling Mila closer. "Keep your secrets." The captain's voice suddenly crackled through the intercom. "We'll be beginning our descent into Seattle shortly. Flight attendants, please prepare the cabin." Lena looked out the window at the velvet night, city lights flickering below like scattered gold dust. She exhaled slowly, nerves rising again, the wedding, the tension, the awkward family reunion ahead. "I'm not ready for this," she murmured. Damien turned toward her. "You've already made it this far," he said. "Whatever happens next, you'll face it. You're already doing the impossible." Lena turned to him, her voice barely a whisper. "Why are you being so kind to me?" And for a moment, Damien didn't answer. He just looked at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. Then he said, "Because someone should be." The seatbelt sign dinged. Passengers rustled around them, raising their seats, snapping open tray tables they never used. The overhead lights flickered brighter, casting a sterile glow over everyone's sleep-deprived faces. Lena felt it all happening around her, but she was still seated in stillness, her arms around Mila, her thoughts circling the man beside her. Damien had grown quiet since the descent announcement. He didn't retreat, but he seemed more measured, more careful, as though a clock had started ticking the moment the wheels prepared to touch the ground. Lena glanced out the window. The city of Seattle sparkled below them, tall buildings framed by black water. A glowing necklace stretched along the harbor. The plane jolted slightly as it began its slow, steady descent. She took a shaky breath. "Back to reality," she said under her breath, trying to muster humor. Damien glanced at her and smiled faintly. "You never left it." The tires kissed the tarmac with a soft thump. A collective exhale passed through the cabin like a wave. Phones lit up, seatbelts unclicked too early, babies stirred, Voices whispered. Lena stayed seated, her fingers gently rocking Mila's back. "Guess this is where we say goodbye," she said, trying to sound casual, but she couldn't ignore the pinch in her chest. Damien didn't respond right away. Instead, he reached into the inside pocket of his sweater, a smooth, deliberate motion. From it, he pulled a business card, simple, cream-colored, elegant, raised black letters embossed on thick cardstock. He held it out to her. "If you ever need anything at all, call this number." Lena took the card slowly, puzzled, then she read it, and froze. Damien Blackwood, CEO, Blackwood Foundation, Seattle. W.A. Her heart stopped. Blackwood. That name was everywhere. Scholarships, billboards, community grants, housing projects for single mothers, free clinics, children's hospitals. It was a name that had made headlines over the past 5 years as a philanthropic powerhouse. Damien Blackwood. Was that Damien? Lena looked up at him, stunned. You're the guy with all the programs, the housing stuff, the foundation." He nodded quietly. Guilty. She opened her mouth, closed it. Everything shifted. The way he dressed, the calm, the empathy, the easy money that seemed to hum beneath his quiet demeanor. He wasn't just some kind man in economy class. He was a billionaire, her billionaire, the kind whose name showed up in press releases about people like her. The room spun. "You sat next to me on purpose," she said slowly. "No. I didn't know you'd be here," Damien replied, his voice low, even. "But you are supposed to be in first class. I downgraded. Last minute." Lena felt heat crawl into her cheeks. All the times she poured out her pain to him, told him about her rent, her baby, her broken-down car, and all this time, he was watching. "Why didn't you say anything?" He exhaled, voice still steady. "Because you weren't supposed to talk to a CEO. You were supposed to talk to a person." Lena gripped the card tighter, unsure whether to laugh or throw it back at him. She stared at him, her voice sharpening. "Is this what you do? Sit next to people like me and take notes for your next project? Look at the poor single mom. Let's give her a press release and a food box." Damien's face dropped slightly, not in guilt, but in sadness. "It's not like that." "Then what is it?" she demanded. The seatbelt sign dinged off. Passengers stood up, began pulling bags from overhead bins, but the row around Lena and Damien remained still, held in quiet tension. He looked at her, trying to explain with calm urgency. "I wasn't sitting next to a demographic. I was sitting next to you. And I meant everything I said." Lena's pulse pounded, her vision blurred slightly. She wanted to believe him, but a storm of shame and fury had already started inside her. She had told him everything, unfiltered, raw, and he had let her spill out her soul while he sat there knowing he had more power in one phone call than she had in her entire life. Suddenly, the kindness she'd clung to felt tainted, like it had strings. Lena stood up stiffly, one arm around Mila. "Thanks for the flight," she said, voice cold. She shoved the card into her hoodie pocket and moved toward the aisle without looking back. Damien stayed seated, watching her walk away, and though his face remained composed, his eyes carried something that looked an awful lot like regret. The airport was a blur of fluorescent lights and shuffling feet. Voices echoed, wheels rolled over linoleum floors, children fussed. Announcements boomed overhead, too fast and impersonal to process, but Lena barely noticed any of it. She kept her head low, one arm clutching Mila, the other dragging her scuffed duffel bag with the torn zipper behind her. The bag bumped and caught on every surface. But she didn't stop. She couldn't. Her ears still rang with that name, Damien Blackwood. Of course she'd heard it before. He was practically a myth in the circles of people like her low-income mothers, women in shelters, people scrabbling paycheck to paycheck. He was the man in press photos with ribbons and scissors, the man who made things better from the comfort of boardrooms. And now he was the man who let her fall asleep on his shoulder while knowing exactly who he was, and she didn't. That knowledge stung. At baggage claim, she found a quiet corner near a malfunctioning vending machine and rocked Mila gently. The baby stirred and whimpered, eyes fluttering. Lena reached into the side pocket for a bottle, but found it warm and half-empty. Figures. She sighed and leaned against the wall, exhaustion pressing down on her. You shouldn't have told him everything. You handed him your whole story like a confession, and he didn't even have the decency to be honest about who he was. The weight of it came crashing down all at once. The shame, the vulnerability, the humiliation of trusting too quickly. She was about to text a rideshare when she heard a familiar voice behind her. Lena, wait. She froze, then turned slowly. Damien was walking toward her, his carry-on slung over one shoulder, a calm but urgent look on his face. Lena stiffened. You followed me. I didn't want it to end like that, he said. It wasn't your ending to write, she snapped. Other passengers nearby turned to look. A woman tugged her suitcase away, sensing tension. Damien stopped a few feet in front of her, hands out in a non-threatening gesture. I wasn't lying to you. No, she said sharply. You let me talk about my rent, my broken car, my life, and you said nothing. You just sat there, soaking it in like some kind of social experiment. That's not what this was. Then what was it? Damien research recruitment for your next big foundation campaign. His face tightened. I sat next to a woman who was drowning and did what any decent person would have done. No. You sat next to a case study, and you saw a headline, she said, her voice rising. I actually thought someone was being kind to me for me, but it was just you, evaluating me. Damien stepped forward, but Lena pulled back instinctively. I know how this looks, he said. Quieter now. But I swear to you my interest wasn't about your problems. It was about you. Easy to say when you have the luxury to choose when to care. Her voice cracked. I don't get that choice. Damien, I don't get to fly around handing out kindness and calling it a mission. I have to survive every single day. Mila whimpered in her arms. Lena bounced her instinctively, blinking furiously as tears filled her eyes. I don't want your charity, she added, voice trembling. And I definitely don't want your pity. Damien's face was unreadable now, somewhere between regret and restraint. This isn't pity, he said slowly. And it's not charity. It's a connection. One I didn't expect, but I felt it. Didn't you? Lena looked away. The worst part was, she had felt it. That safety, that warmth, something she hadn't known in years. It terrified her more than anything. You lied, she whispered. I withheld, he replied gently. Because when people know who I am, they don't see me. They see the CEO, the money, the power. I didn't want that to be the first thing you saw. And what if I wanted to choose who I opened up to? She shot back. You took that away. He didn't argue. Instead, he nodded slowly, his expression shifting from defense to sorrow. You're right, he said. Lena blinked. What? You're right. I should have told you? I should have respected your right to know who was holding your child, who you were falling asleep beside." The honesty in his voice cut through her anger. She looked at him again. For the first time, he looked uncertain, not polished, not composed, just human. "I wasn't trying to fix you," he added. "I was trying to be someone who stayed, who didn't walk away the moment things got complicated." Lena's mouth opened, but the words wouldn't come, because deep down, beneath the pride and the anger, a small, broken part of her wanted to believe him. "But how could I have to go?" she said finally, her voice thin and hoarse. She turned sharply and disappeared into the crowd before he could follow. Behind her, Damien stood still in the middle of the chaos, staring at the card she had never returned. The room smelled faintly of mildew and old air conditioning. Flickering light from a cheap plastic lamp barely lit the space. The carpet was a threadbare gray-brown with suspicious stains, and the bathroom door creaked when opened, as if protesting its own existence. But Lena Morales barely noticed. She sat at the edge of the lumpy motel bed, cradling Mila against her chest, rocking gently while staring blankly at the wall. Her daughter's eyes were closed, a soft sigh escaping her tiny lips every now and then. It was the first moment of calm since the airport. Lena had taken the cheapest room she could find in Seattle, a place listed online with the words cozy, no frills, great location code for peeling wallpaper and heaters that sounded like dying lawnmowers. She should have slept. She hadn't slept in nearly 2 days, but her mind wouldn't let her. Not after everything with Damien. She kept replaying their conversation, his voice, his expression, his words. "This isn't pity. I should have told you. I was trying to be someone who stayed." He made her feel seen, and now that made her feel ashamed, stupid, even because for one night she had let herself believe in a stranger. She glanced at the navy blue dress hanging from a coat hanger over the closet knob. It was her only nice dress, one she'd worn to a job interview and to her mother's funeral. She had patched it twice. It still fit. Barely. She sighed. Tomorrow was her sister's wedding. A sister she hadn't spoken to in 2 years. A sister who had once called her a burden, an embarrassment. And now she was expected to show up like nothing had ever happened. Lena looked down at Mila, whose tiny fingers gripped her hoodie. "You deserve better than this," she whispered. The baby stirred, then settled again. A knock broke the silence. Sharp. 3 taps. Lena jumped. Her heart began pounding. She stood, rocked Mila gently in one arm, and stepped cautiously toward the door. Maybe it was the manager, or worse, maybe it was Damien. She peered through the peephole and froze. Noelle. Her older sister stood in the hallway, dressed in an elegant cream coat and sleek black heels. Her dark hair was pinned in a smooth chignon, and her makeup was flawless. She looked like a bridal magazine cover model standing in front of a crumbling motel door. Lena hesitated, then slowly unlocked the door. "Noelle." Her sister blinked, clearly startled by the condition of the room and by the person standing in front of her. "Hi," Noelle said, her voice softer than Lena expected. "Can I come in?" Lena stepped back wordlessly. Noelle walked in, heels clicking on the cracked linoleum entryway. She scanned the room. Her mouth tightened slightly, but she said nothing. "What are you doing here?" Lena asked, suspicious. "I came to talk," Noelle said, perching carefully on the lone chair near the window. "If this is about tomorrow." "I already told you it's not," Noelle interrupted. "Or it is, but not in the way you think." Lena stayed standing. Mila nestled deeper into her chest. "I didn't expect to see you," she said flatly. "Definitely not in this place." "I know," Noel replied. "And I didn't come here to judge you. I came because I owe you an apology." Lena blinked. She laughed once, bitterly. "You haven't spoken to me in 2 years. Last time we did, you said I was irresponsible and that keeping Mila would ruin my life." Noel nodded. "I remember." There was a long pause. "I was pregnant too," Noel said suddenly. Lena froze. What Noel's hands clasped in her lap. "2 years ago, when you told me you were pregnant, I was, too. But mine didn't last. I lost the baby 2 weeks later." Lena felt something shift inside her. Noel's eyes were glossy now. "I was angry at you not because of what you did, but because it felt like you were given what I had lost, and I hated you for it, and I hated myself for hating you." Lena sank slowly onto the bed, stunned. "I didn't know. I didn't want you to know," Noel said. "I threw myself into work and planning this wedding and pretending everything was fine, but I wasn't. I was grieving, and I took it out on you." The sisters sat in silence. Mila stirred between them. Lena broke it first. "I wish you'd told me," she said quietly. "I wish I had too." Noel leaned forward now, her tone shifting. "But that's not the only reason I came. I got a call this morning. A man named Damien Blackwood was trying to reach you." Lena's breath caught. "He said you two met on a flight, that something happened, and that you walked away." Lena looked away. Noel continued. "He asked if I knew where you were staying. He said it was urgent. And when I asked why, he told me the whole story, about the flight, about Mila, about how you fell asleep on his shoulder." Lena was suddenly very aware of the pressure in her chest. Noel's voice dropped. "He said he hasn't been able to stop thinking about you, that he tried to explain, but you wouldn't let him. And Lena, he's not calling to pitch some program. He told me very clearly that he's not trying to help you. He's trying to find you, because he's in love with you." Lena sat still, so still. She thought she might float off the bed. "What he talked about you like you were the first real person he'd met in years," Noel continued. "He said you reminded him why he started his foundation in the first place, that you weren't someone he wanted to save you, were someone he wanted to stand beside." Lena's throat tightened. "He's staying at my hotel," Noel added. "He's going to be at the wedding reception tomorrow night. I invited him." Lena's eyes filled. Noel reached out slowly, placing her hand over her sister's. "You don't have to go. You don't have to forgive him, but I think maybe you should give him a chance to speak, for real this time." Lena looked down at her baby, at the small fingers, the fluttering eyelashes, the quiet rhythm of life resting in her arms, and for the first time since the plane touched down, she let herself wonder, what if kindness didn't have strings? What if love really could come from 17C, long after Noel left the motel room? The silence lingered, not empty, not hollow, just still, like the quiet after a storm has passed. But before the sun dares to break through, Lena sat alone in the dim room, her knees tucked under her on the bed, while Mila slept in the crook of her arm. The hum of the old heater filled the space, steady and warm. Outside, distant traffic whispered beneath a drizzling Seattle sky. Lena stared at the wall, but her mind was turned inward, flipping through years of pain, choice, and survival like brittle pages in a worn-out journal. She hadn't spoken to Noel in 2 years, hadn't let herself feel that betrayal, hadn't wanted to touch the memory of their last fight screaming over the phone, a slammed door, and a silence that hardened over time like ice between them. But tonight had thawed something, and now all of it was rushing back. She remembered the morning she found out she was pregnant. There had been no celebration, no excited phone calls or soft sonogram photos stuck to the fridge, just the sterile light of a Walgreens bathroom, a plastic stick, and a slow slide to the cold floor. He had left 3 days later. No goodbye, just a text. I'm not ready for this. Don't contact me again. Her next memory was of throwing up in the alley behind Mel's diner, then clocking in for the late shift because she couldn't afford to lose another job. She had fought for everything, for every pack of diapers, for every ounce of formula, for every hour of sleep snatched between double shifts. No parents, no partner, no handouts. Everywhere she turned, people looked at her like a statistic. Young, brown, broke, another girl who made bad choices. But they hadn't seen the nights she sat awake, watching Mila breathe to make sure she didn't stop. They hadn't seen the job interviews she went to with spit up on her collar and hope in her voice. They hadn't seen her crying quietly in a bathroom stall, then pulling herself together because her lunch break was over. And now, someone who had everything had sat beside her on a plane, not to fix her, not to rescue her, but to hold her baby without fear, without judgment, without conditions. Lena's fingers gripped the edge of her dress as if to keep herself grounded. Could she believe it? Could she trust that this was more than pity wearing a nice watch? Or had she simply been a temporary distraction for a man used to being worshipped? Her pride and her fear had always walked hand in hand. They told her, don't trust too fast, don't lean on anyone, don't mistake kindness for commitment. And yet, Damien hadn't asked anything from her. He hadn't tried to buy her story. He hadn't used her pain as an opportunity. In fact, he had risked her wrath just to tell her the truth. She reached into her hoodie pocket and pulled out the card she had shoved there earlier. Damien Blackwood, CEO, Blackwood Foundation. The card was creased now, softened from her grip, but the letters still gleamed quietly, confident, just like the man himself. She stared at it, then turned it over. On the back, he'd written in pen, almost like an afterthought, "You don't need saving, but if you ever want someone beside you, call me." Her throat tightened. Tears blurred her vision, because it wasn't what he was that scared her. It was the way he made her feel, safe, strong, seen, and she hadn't felt any of those things in years. Mila stirred in her arms, stretching in her sleep, a soft whimper curling from her lips. Lena pressed a kiss to her daughter's forehead and whispered, "I'm trying, baby. I'm really trying." She didn't know what tomorrow would bring. Didn't know if she had the courage to walk into that ballroom, dressed in borrowed confidence and heels she hadn't worn since before the pregnancy. But one thing was clearer now than it had ever been. She had survived worse. And maybe, just maybe, she was brave enough to walk toward something good, even if it terrified her. Damien Blackwood stood by the tall window of his hotel suite. The city of Seattle spread below him like a sleeping giant under gray skies. He hadn't slept, not even a little. The room behind him was pristine, turned-down service, untouched. Room service trays still full, the bed made but unused. The silence was thick, broken only by the low hum of traffic outside and the occasional clatter of a distant elevator door. His phone buzzed on the table. Another missed call from his assistant. He ignored it. His thoughts were still caught somewhere back at the airport. Back in that moment when Lena had looked at him with fire in her eyes and said, "I thought someone was being kind to me for me." He closed his eyes now, remembering how her voice cracked, how tightly she had held her daughter, how quickly she had disappeared into the crowd. He'd seen 100 angry faces in his time, but hers wasn't just anger. It was hurt, disappointment, and that was worse, because he hadn't meant to break her trust. He just wanted to be someone she could trust. Later that morning, Damien sat at a quiet cafe near the venue, staring at a cooling cup of coffee while across from him. Noelle Rivera finished retelling what had happened between her and her sister 2 years ago. The miscarriage, the bitterness, the silence. Damien listened without interruption. When she finished, she leaned forward slightly. "She's not like anyone you've met before, is she?" Damien shook his head. "No, she isn't." Noelle folded her hands. "You should know. She's not easy to win back. Pride is the only thing she's had to protect herself." "I don't want to win her," Damien said softly. "I want to deserve her." Noelle tilted her head, studying him. "She's been in survival mode for a long time. You can't expect her to understand trust the way you do." He nodded. "I don't." "Then tell me this," she asked, voice gentler now. "Why her? Of all the people you've met, why did she get under your skin?" Damien sat back in the chair, his fingers tightening around the coffee cup. "She reminded me of someone," he said after a pause. "Your ex." He smiled faintly. "No, my mother." Noelle looked surprised. "I don't talk about her much," he continued. "She died when I was 23, but she raised me alone. No education, 3 jobs, food stamps, eviction notices taped to our door like reminders we didn't belong." His voice had softened, deepened. "She used to come home and collapse on the couch, smelling like bleach and fryer grease. But no matter how tired she was, she'd put her hand on my head and say, 'Baby, we keep showing up. No matter how they look at us, we keep showing up.'" He looked down for a moment. "Lena had that same energy, that same fire, that same gentleness with her daughter, even when everything else was falling apart." Noelle didn't say anything for a while. Then, quietly, "You think you love her?" "I don't think." Damien replied, "I know." He looked up. "And I'm not walking away from this. Not because it's complicated, not because she's hurt, but because she matters. And not in the abstract way people in boardrooms use that word. She matters because she's real, and I'm tired of everything in my life being curated and safe." He paused. "Lena makes me want to show up." Noelle smiled, small and cautious, but genuine. "Well, then," she said, "you better be ready, because if she walks into that reception tomorrow, she won't be there for a show." Damien nodded once, firmly. "She shouldn't be." That night, alone again in his hotel suite, Damien pulled out a worn photo he kept in the inside flap of his briefcase. His mother, her hair up in a scarf, her hands stained from work, smiling like she carried the weight of the world and still found room for love. He ran a thumb over the image. "I think I met someone you'd like. Ma," he whispered. And for the first time in a long time, his voice wavered. Because he didn't want to just be the man who funded programs. He wanted to be the man who earned the kind of love he'd watched Lena give her daughter without hesitation. Not because he was rich, not because he was good on paper, but because in her presence he remembered who he was before the suits, before the strategy, before the public image, just a boy trying to be worthy of a woman who never stopped showing up. And now he was going to show up for her. The ballroom shimmered with soft gold lighting and the quiet clinking of crystal. Elegant music flowed through the air like a gentle tide. Waiters in black ties weaved through the crowd, balancing trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres. Floral arrangements spilled over white-draped tables, and the sound of laughter floated from every corner of the room. But Lena Morales wasn't looking at any of that. She stood just outside the open doorway, her fingers tightening around the strap of a borrowed handbag, her breath shallow. Mila was upstairs in the care of a hotel nanny, a last-minute arrangement Noel had insisted on and somehow paid for. Lena's emerald green dress, borrowed from her sister's closet, clung softly to her figure. It was the kind of dress she never wore, feminine, elegant, dangerously close to beautiful. Her dark hair was brushed and pinned, and for the first time in over a year, she wore makeup, just enough to hide the shadows beneath her eyes, just enough to feel like someone else. But inside, she was still terrified. Her heels tapped lightly on the marble floor as she took a small step forward. Then another, each one deliberate, each one heavier than the last. She paused just outside the doorway, heart pounding. What if he wasn't here? Worse, what if he was, but looked at her differently now? What if her anger had changed something he couldn't unsee? What if she walked into that room and became someone he pitied again? Her hand hovered near the frame of the door, fingers trembling slightly. Inside, she saw Noel dancing with her new husband, beaming beneath a cascade of soft lights. People laughed, clapped. Everything seemed effortless, perfect. And then she saw him, Damien, sitting at a table near the back, alone. He wore a black tuxedo, tailored to him in a way that seemed unfair, his shoulders straight, his gaze calm, his posture unreadable. But he wasn't looking at the stage or the dancers. He was looking at the door, at her. Lena inhaled sharply, caught in his gaze like it had hands. She hadn't even stepped in yet, hadn't even decided if she would. But he saw her anyway, saw through her. Damien stood, not dramatically, not abruptly, just rose from his seat like gravity had pulled him toward her the moment she appeared, and even across the room through the candles and the chatter and the music she could see it in his eyes, hope, fear, something softer than both. Lena's legs moved before her mind caught up. She walked into the room. The music dimmed as a slower song began, and the lights shifted cooler now, softer. Damien met her halfway, stopping just a few steps in front of her. The crowd fell away. The air felt thin. The silence between them was loud. He looked at her like he hadn't breathed since the last time he saw her. "I was afraid you wouldn't come," he said quietly. "I almost didn't," Lena admitted. Their eyes held, suspended. "But someone told me being brave isn't about being unafraid," she added. "It's about doing the thing anyway." Damien nodded once, deeply. "I should have been honest with you from the beginning," he said. "Not about my job, but about how I felt, about why I stayed with you, why I held your daughter like she was already family." Lena's breath caught. "The moment Mila fell asleep in my arms, and you let yourself rest." He stepped just slightly closer. "I realized my life had been full of noise, but that was the first time in years. It felt quiet." Lena blinked hard, her voice barely there. "You don't know what I've been through." "No," Damien said, "but I want to. Not to save you, not to fix anything, just to walk beside you. If you'll let me." She laughed softly through her tears. "You make it sound so easy." "It won't be," he said honestly. "You've been strong for too long. You've had to be. But maybe now you don't have to carry it alone." Lena looked at him, really looked, not the suit, not the title, not the business card in her pocket, just him, the man who had hummed her daughter to sleep, the man who had let her rest without judgment, the man who had shown up again and again. She stepped forward, closing the space between them, and quietly said, "Then don't just stand there. Dance with me." Damien didn't hesitate. He took her hand gently, reverently, and led her to the floor. Their bodies moved slowly, naturally, as if they had always belonged there. He didn't speak. He just held her. And in the soft hush between violin notes, Lena rested her head against his chest and let herself believe, maybe this time, kindness was real, love could last, and maybe, just maybe, this was what it felt like to finally come home. Later that night, the music had softened to background ambiance, and the celebration had taken on a slower rhythm, clinking glasses, quiet laughter, conversations laced with warmth. But Lena Morales and Damian Blackwood had stepped out onto the quiet hotel terrace. The night was cool. A breeze rolled in from the bay, rustling the hem of Lena's green dress and lifting Damian's collar. They stood in silence at first, side by side, leaning on the railing. The lights of Seattle stretched far into the distance, a blur of possibility and things unsaid. Lena took a breath. "I didn't come here for this." "I know," Damian said without looking at her. "I didn't come to dance or to fall for anyone, especially not someone like you." His head turned, brows lifted in a gentle challenge. "Someone like me." She looked over at him, soft smile, unshakable eyes. "You know what I mean." He chuckled. "I'm starting to think I don't." Lena sighed, folding her arms. "You have this whole other world, money, power, a staff that probably makes sure your coffee is the perfect temperature. You live in penthouses. I barely pay rent on a studio the size of your bathroom." "Lena, I'm serious," she interrupted. "You say you see me, but you don't know what it's like to worry every day if you'll have enough formula for your kid or whether your car will make it to work. You don't know what it's like to beg for hours at the diner, take cash under the table, and still come up short." She turned to face him now. "I'm not ashamed of the life I've fought for, but I am terrified of being someone's project, or worse, someone's fantasy." Damien was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "You think I want a fantasy?" She hesitated. "I think it's easy to fall in love with someone when you only know the good parts." Damien took a step closer. "I fell in love with the way you rocked Mila while the whole plane judged you, with the way you apologized to everyone even though you were the one being treated like an inconvenience." He was closer now, not touching, just steady. "I fell in love when you stood in that aisle, shaking, and still protected your daughter like a warrior. When you told me your truth, without editing it to make it easier for me to digest." Lena felt her chest tighten. "I didn't fall for perfect," he added. "I fell for real. And I've had enough perfect in my life to know it's usually a lie." She swallowed. Tears pricked her eyes. But she didn't want to cry. Not again. She'd cried enough this week for an entire year. So instead she whispered, "I don't know how to trust this. I don't know how to receive something that doesn't come with a price." "You don't owe me anything," Damien said simply. "That's what scares me," she admitted. He stepped forward now, finally reaching out, his hand brushing hers. "Then let me say it clearly," he said. "I don't want to save you, Lena. I want to be there when you save yourself, and if I'm lucky, maybe I get to stand beside you while you do it." She stared at him, heart pounding. No press release, no charity speech. He smiled, slow and sure. "Just me, a man who got lucky enough to be in seat 17C. They stood there for another moment, hands barely touching. Then she said, "I don't need someone to complete me." He nodded. "Good, because you're already whole." She looked up at him then, eyes glassy. "But I wouldn't mind someone who could stay." "I don't know how to leave," he said. And when she finally stepped into his arms, not because she needed him to catch her, but because she chose to, he held her with the care of someone who had been waiting his entire life for a moment that felt this honest. The breeze blew around them, but Lena felt warm for the first time in weeks. Because love, she realized, wasn't the dramatic rescue. It was this, the quiet afterward, the words that hadn't been said but were now understood, the feeling that maybe, just maybe, she didn't have to walk alone anymore. The next morning dawned gray and gentle, as Seattle often did. In the corner suite of the reception hotel, early light spilled through the sheer curtains, casting soft lines across the bed where Lena Morales sat barefoot, cross-legged in a borrowed hotel robe. She wasn't used to this kind of stillness. No crying baby, no alarm clock, no morning rush to throw on yesterday's jeans and make it to the diner before the manager started shouting. Just silence, just calm, just unfamiliar comfort. Across the room, in the adjoining sitting area, Damian Blackwood stood at the window holding Mila in his arms. It was the second time she'd fallen asleep on him. This time, though, it wasn't desperation or coincidence. It was trust. Her tiny body rested easily against his chest, her head tucked beneath his jaw. He walked slowly, gently bouncing her as he gazed out over the city just like he had done on the plane. But now there was no airplane hum, no crying, no judgment from strangers. Only a man and a baby who had become unexpectedly, impossibly intertwined. Lena watched them from across the room, unsure if she was witnessing something real or something too fragile to believe in yet. "You're good with her," she said softly. Damian looked over his shoulder, smiling. "She's good with me. She doesn't do that with anyone else," Lena added. "Not even my sister." He rocked her gently. "Maybe she knows she's safe." Lena blinked. "You're not afraid of holding someone else's child?" Damian turned to face her fully, his expression calm. "I've been afraid of a lot of things, but not of her. And not of you." He crossed the room slowly and sat beside her, cradling Mila as if she were his own. Lena looked at the two of them, her daughter in his arms, his face so open and present, no performance, no tension, and her chest ached with a feeling she didn't recognize at first. Longing, not for a savior, not for stability, but for this, for presence, for someone who stayed, who wanted to stay. She looked at him, voice trembling slightly. "I don't know how to do this. I've spent so long bracing for people to leave." "I'm not people," Damian said gently. Lena's fingers twisted in the robe's sash. "You're a billionaire CEO with an empire to run. I'm a single mom who sleeps with one eye open and counts coupons like lifelines." He didn't flinch. "You're also the strongest person I've ever met." "That scares me," she whispered, "because the moment I believe that you really mean it, the moment I let myself need you," he finished for her, "then I have the power to break you. She nodded, eyes glistening. Damien looked down at Mila. "She's not mine by blood," he said slowly. "But if you let me, I will love her like she is. I'll wake up for night feedings. I'll learn how to braid her hair. I'll show up at her school plays, even if I don't understand the plot. I will stand next to you at every parent-teacher conference, even if I have to reschedule board meetings." Lena's eyes widened. "I'm not offering you a lifeline. Lena," he continued, "I'm offering you a life. Not one where I carry you, but one where we walk together even when it's messy." He turned to her fully now. "I know you're used to people walking away, but I wasn't raised to run." Lena pressed her hand to her chest, trying to slow her heartbeat. "I don't know if I can believe in forever." "That's fine," he said, brushing a stray hair behind her ear. "Can you believe in today?" She looked at him, at Mila, still sleeping peacefully, at her hands, her heart, her fear. And then, quietly, bravely, she nodded. "I can do that." Damien leaned forward, pressing his forehead gently to hers. "Then that's where we start." They sat there in the silence, three people wrapped in something softer than fate, stronger than logic, and braver than either had dared to hope for. Not a rescue, not a charity story, not a fantasy, but a beginning. The sun crept over Seattle in a slow, golden spill, brushing rooftops, glinting off wet sidewalks, warming glass windows as the city yawned awake, inside a quiet cafe tucked between two bookstores. Lena Morales sat by the window, her fingers curled around a warm mug of coffee. Mila was nestled in a soft carrier against her chest, napping peacefully after a full bottle and a walk through the cool morning air. Across the table, Damien Blackwood sat with his sleeves rolled up and a gentle look in his eyes. He wasn't in a suit today, no expensive tie, no business mask, just a soft navy sweater, jeans, and a man fully present in his own skin. They weren't saying much, didn't need to. The silence between them had changed. It was no longer heavy with unspoken doubts. It was light now, comfortable, like the early draft of something real. Lena sipped her coffee, watching people walk by on the sidewalk. Couples, kids, a man with a dog, a woman reading as she walked. She looked down at Mila, who shifted slightly in her sleep. Her tiny fingers curled around Lena's necklace. Then she glanced up at Damien. "Do you ever think about how weird it is?" she asked. He raised an eyebrow. "How weird what is that a crying baby on a plane led to this." Damien smiled. "I think about it all the time." She paused, then added, "I almost didn't board that flight." He nodded. "I almost stayed in first class." They both laughed, soft and slow. Lena's laugh faded into thoughtfulness. "There's still so much I don't know," she admitted. "About you, about this, about where this goes." Damien leaned in slightly. "Then we find out together, one day at a time." She studied him. "This isn't a fairy tale." "No," he said. "It's better, because it's true." Her throat tightened. She had spent so long defining herself by what she wasn't, not stable, not wealthy, not ideal. But here, now, in this quiet moment with a man who chose her, not because of what she lacked, but because of what she endured, she felt something shift. She was no longer surviving. She was becoming, and that was powerful. Mila stirred again, her eyes fluttering open, looking up at Damien. She blinked sleepily, then gave a soft coo. Damien reached over without hesitation, extending a finger. Mila grabbed it. "Hi again," he whispered. Lena smiled, small, real. breaking through her usual caution. She reached into her bag and pulled out the business card he had given her on the plane. She held it between two fingers, looking at it one last time. Then she folded it neatly down the middle. "I don't think I need this any more," she said. Damien tilted his head. "Why?" "Because I already found what I needed." She slipped the card into her coat pocket, not as a lifeline, but as a reminder of the day her life started changing. Not when he handed her the card, but when he held her child like she mattered, like they mattered, outside the window, the sun caught on a passing cyclist, momentarily blinding them both with light. When it passed, Lena leaned across the table, eyes clear. "So," she said. "What happens now?" Damien smiled. Now he reached over and took her hand, brushing his thumb across her knuckles. "Now we live the story we're writing. Sometimes love doesn't begin with grand gestures or perfect timing. Sometimes it begins in row 17B between a crying baby and a woman too tired to keep pretending she doesn't need help. Sometimes it looks like a stranger offering his shoulder, a whispered lullaby, a man who doesn't flinch at responsibility but welcomes it. Sometimes the real miracle isn't being rescued. It's finally having someone walk beside you. And when that happens, when love feels quiet and real and earned, that's not a fantasy. That's home. What does it mean to truly see someone past their paycheck, past their past, past their pain? Lena didn't need saving. She needed to be seen, to be chosen. And Damien didn't swoop in with money or miracles. He showed up with presence, patience, and something far more powerful than a title commitment. This story wasn't about a rich man fixing a poor woman's life. It was about two broken people learning to stand beside one another when the world would rather keep them apart. It was about fighting the quiet discrimination that tells single mothers they aren't worthy of love, and proving that worth is not measured by wealth, but by resilience. In a world quick to judge and slow to listen, this story reminds us of one truth. Sometimes the most powerful change begins in the smallest seat on the plane. If this story moved you, leave a comment below. Have you ever been judged for what people see on the outside? And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more powerful, real, emotional stories that challenge the world and warm your heart. We'll see you in the next video.